What is up, everybody? It is your ever-loving Uncle Fish back again for the School of...
Look, I'm trying my best to get out of this, and I know it ain't looking pretty. But
Trust me,
nothing
I know
like
I'll probably rewatching all these live streams again.
And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on, too, as co-host, is because you use an iPad and I use the PC. And so far, Little Kyron Silva from California is the only person that's found it yet. Lots of people have found, if you don't get the mini comics, you still get to enjoy the book. It's still awesome. But if you like getting the extra juicy bits, you want to get the mini comics.
The juicy bits now. Now, hold up. Listen, my birthday was literally just yesterday. Now I got to get myself a birthday gift for me. I got to get the DeLorean. By the way, he stated that he does not like you. If anything to quote.
Oh, yeah. I totally sympathize with him hating it. Perfectly normal response.
Sir, you're giving me dangerous ideas right now. You're giving me very, very dangerous ideas.
What is up, everybody? It is your ever-loving Uncle Fish back again with everybody's weird Uncle E. How are you doing? It is School of Fish. How are you doing this Wednesday, man?
Hey, yo, and hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ultra School of Fish. I am having a blast. I had to rush in, stuff my face with some food because I was literally starving all day today, and I have some treats for myself. So that is a little treat for me as of this
Notice
situation.
He didn't bring enough for the rest of the class. I'm just
now hold on.
With this generation, they don't bring enough for the rest of the class.
Now, I should let you know, I myself happened to buy 2 of these. And I would send them to you, but like, where are you, in Arizona or something?
Arkansas. I'm only halfway to Arizona.
Arkansas. I mean, I live in South Florida, so I mean, it is very far over here.
It's a bit of a drive.
I mean, I drove from Bama and back once, so I mean, it's not too far, but still. Anyways, other than that, though, this is going to be a very exciting video for today, so I can't wait to dive into such amazing topics. So, my good friend, Mr. Fish, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to be talking about the ins and outs of character design and what makes a cool looking character. Talking about like shape language, talking about techniques we might use to come up with cool designs and to rough out shapes and stuff. One thing that has particularly been on my mind a lot lately is, sometimes I get stuck when I'm trying to come up with a cool pose, or sometimes when I'm trying to rough out an idea for a character. This is a process that I like to use for roughing that in. And I'm going to share my screen real quick so we can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to turn off that little thing so it's not in the way. And I'm going to make me a new page here. That works fine. Time lapse is set. Good deal. One of the things that I like to do when I'm trying to design a new character or I'm trying to rough in a pose and I just haven't been able to get it right is I made myself, crap, I didn't need to do that. Hold on. I forgot that was a multi-page one, and I don't need a multi-page one. I just made a whole new folder and 20 pages worth of nonsense.
I mean, hey, that's how it be sometimes, Some days we think we got what we need, and the next thing you know, look, your body, your bings, your body, your booms. But
sometimes we got the wrong glasses on, and we can't read the little bitty tiny print as well as we should be able to.
And hello there, Pops Van Zant. How are you doing today?
What's up, Pops? Good to see you. Glad you're here. Always nice to see Pops in the house. So, one thing that I like to do is I made myself a large marker brush that lets me make let's see, how big is it? That's not big enough on this screen.
And while you're doing that, hey there, Sarah White. How you doing? Welcome to the stream.
Oh, my girl's in the house. What is up, Sarah? Always good to see you.
So for those that are just popping in, we're talking about the concept of character design and more or less what we tend to do, because obviously I design characters vastly different in comparison to, say, my good, host over here. So Mr. Fish was actually going into the in-depth explanation on how he designs characters. And then for me, obviously, because I don't know how to do the streaming stuff, I'll more or less dictate how I do characters. We'll get there. We'll find a way. I'll find a way. I'm Hispanic. We usually tend to.
I like to use this big, like, squared off brush to rough in shapes. And it really helps me just kind of piddle around and play. I have a bad habit of jumping right into the details too quick. And when I'm
Mm,
trying to come up with something new, I'll get so far into the details so quickly that I don't even think about other options. And so I like using this big, heavy brush to like rough in rough shapes and, say, like, okay, I know I want the character to say have big shoulders.
right.
And, I want him to have a narrow waist and I want to put big hands on him and big feet to make him feel big and powerful and whatnot. And I will like start with that and then start sketching out ideas off of once I get it to a rough general shape that I like.
Okay.
What's How do you start with a character
So
design?
for me, so obviously, I love the way how you're. Well, for one, I love the overall fact that you're basing it off of a silhouette. So
Mhm.
that's a really interesting factor because a silhouette obviously is the most defining aspect of a character, especially if you're talking for cartoons or even anime related, topics. And by the way, Sarah White, yes, I don't think we have met either. That's totally fine. I'm not offended. It's great that we met for the first time. Anyways, back to the topic at hand here. I like how you tend to go in for the silhouettes and then adding in details later. You're kind of in a way, you know, you're filling in the gaps, or you're more or less allowing details to be put in after, say, you're making the shape. Now, funnily enough, there's another artist who's worked for Marvel DC, box office artist. I think you may or may not have heard him. He did a lot of like Star
Oh yeah.
Wars, Marvel art. So he actually does robots in a very similar fashion as well, where he'll make, or no, maybe him or someone else. I could be very wrong. Don't quote me on that now that I think about it. But I do know that someone also starts with silhouettes when they draw like mechs or robots. So like again, every robot has a very unique shape, and then I can see how you're doing that. Now with me in particular, and because most of the time I draw a lot more, humanoid individuals, a lot of humanoid based characters, very
Mhm.
rarely will I ever actually draw like, a character or a beast or anything of that caliber. So for me, I tend to go like the stick figure route first. So for me, I'll draw like a straight line going down, which would dictate the height, and then I cut that line in half, which is like the pelvic area, and then I cut that, those parts in half as well. So you have the first quarter, which is like the head to the neck, and then the other quarter, which is like, the chest down to the pelvic area, and then the other like quarter going down is the kneecaps. So that's like my height dictation right there. And then I started doing in like, and then I kind of use different shapes. Like I'll probably do a triangle if I want to make them look more leaner, or like almost like a Dorito going downward, or maybe put more of a square shape on the chest to dictate like the, broader shoulders and for them to look stronger. And I try to play with circles, triangles, and squares because again, everything's in this world is made up of those three shapes. So
Mhm.
I try to find a way to implement those shape languages when designing a character. Now, obviously, I wish I did that a little bit more with my characters of the Unbeatables from some of them, and I like to believe I have done that to an extent. So for me, like I said, I start with the stick figure method. Now, of course, there are times where I'll just draw out a pose, but usually, like I said, stick figures, and I would tend to use triangles and some other shapes here and there. Sometimes I'll just kind of blob it in and see where I go from there.
Yeah. And you know, this is this is just a way that I like to start roughing and stuff, and then I can play around with it and see where I want to take it from there. Like you could do a big bulky character and, say make, the hands gigantic and the head a little smaller and give it like a really tough exterior like rock or something. And, end up with some massive thing that you might, make as like the powerhouse of a team of, a quartet of heroes or something, let's say. But you could take that in a lot of different ways too. Like, let's see, that this could be armor plating that is a big armored piece on their shoulder, and they could have smaller cybernetic muscles in here, and then big plates over here. Or this could be their big, shaggy, maybe it's a werewolf character or something, and he's got all this big massive fur there and a little bit of skinny there just because it looked cool in the basic shape. And like you were saying, the shape language, it's really nice. It's really nice to use shape language that really speaks to the heart of the character right away so that you can spot it from a distance.
Hmm.
Like, this is a very powerful character, or this is a very weak character because it's very skinny and very frail. Or, maybe he's got just enough muscle to that frame that you instantly read him as acrobatic, like you do when you see a Spider-Man or something like that, or Daredevil, or then there's other things like the masters used to use all the time. Let me get my brush back here and go back. They would use like real angular stuff, like you would do a head like this with a real tiny jaw and angular shapes and make a villain's head out of that. And from a distance when that guy first comes on scene, I can't trust that guy with the pointy chin and the big head.
Now,
Or
nope,
go ahead.
continue. No, continue statement. I feel like I was interrupting there. My bad.
No, I was going to say, or if you give them a big square head, then that reads a lot more powerful. And you can take the regular shaped head and then give it a little bit more squared off jaw. And like you go from being a hero to say being a dumb ogre or something that's stronger than it is smart, the bigger you take that jaw out. But that shape language helps you read it really quickly. And if you do other things that make this character unique from the shapes of all your other characters, if you can tell all your characters apart just from the silhouette of the character, then you instantly know you've got a great design, you've got easy to recognize design. Like there's a reason that Velma is shorter and got
Shaggy is
got
skinny.
some meat on her thighs, and Shaggy is so tall and skinny, and Fred has such broad shoulders. There's a reason they all look a little bit different. So they instantly read as different characters.
And then
Before the color and everything else comes in, you know which one's Scooby, which one's Shag, which one's Velma. And
so on and so forth. And also, I was actually going to say, so of course, having classic shapes like those, you can always play into the trope of like triangles looking more dangerous, squares being
mhm,
more secure, rounds being more friendly. But you can actually subvert those expectations as well, depending on how the story is written. Maybe you might have a character that looks triangular, but maybe he's not really the bad guy. Maybe he's misinterpreted as so. Or again, maybe from antagonistic. Again, squared individuals always tend to be stable and strong, but what if you were to find a way to make it look like as if they're weak or frail?
mhm.
And the same thing with rounds, given how they're friendly. Or what if you were able to make that a shape of like a threatening kind of a notion? So trying to do that is always like a bit of a unique exercise too. Like that could always be like a fun little idea on like expanding your abilities to go further. Like maybe at first you can probably like do a few exercises of like, okay, let me draw some characters based off of triangles. And you notice how they always tend to look a little angrier, a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more uh out there. Very just you can sense that again, each shape does bring something unique to it. But try to like subvert it in your next batch if you were to do it as like a fun little way of like, okay, I've made all these triangular characters. There's always a common theme with that. Now, how could you subvert that and then turn it into something else? Maybe for instance, a rounded character always looks very, like friendly. We'll try to find a way to make it non-friendly or very threatening to some extent, because that could actually, make it a little bit interesting. And from there, you can give that, design a story. Because again,
Mhm.
we're not just designing characters. We're not just designing things just for the sake of it looking cool. Because don't get me wrong, we can make cool characters all day, but they're only as cool as again the story that's also given. So their design also do play a part into that. Like again, best example that I can put out there is the Mighty Call, right? Because I read those books; those are amazing. Those are a ton of fun, right? But you can tell throughout the entire story, like you can see his face. He's a very brooding individual. He's
Oh yeah.
very much like if I had to describe the shape personally, I see a lot more like triangles, but also some squares mixed in there to show that he's strong, huge, bulky,
And he's
but also
definitely got like a very small cranium, and then like a very big jaw and all these big muscles to show like he don't have a lot going on upstairs. That's not cause strength at all. He's got a tiny little head,
yeah, brain
but
literally
the
got a
bigger he
bird brain.
gets, the further he goes down. He's all muscle and brawn, and that instantly shows you that you know he works with his muscles first. But there's nothing saying that you couldn't make the big blocky guy be the brain on your team. I mean, that was a pretty common trope in the like late 80s to try and subvert that what we instantly would assume would be the big dumb guy and make some of the big characters on some teams and some cartoons be the smart guy. And and that was fun. I dug that. I liked the fact that they did that. Being the biggest guy on most groups, it was nice to have the big guy assumed to be smart every once in a while.
That's actually true. Plus, a good example of a character in that situation is Beast from X Men. He is
Oh
a
yeah.
very. If I had to describe his shape language, automatically I think of squares. Very
Hmm.
safe, very stable in mental and as physical as he can be. And yes, I also noticed that you're drawing
Nailed it.
Oscar, the garbage, the. I can't. Okay, either I can't
It
read or
just
I can't.
came to me with the shape of the squiggle I made for the head, and I just thought Oscar the Grouch
You're like, all
as a
right, we're gonna
trash
have fun
cyborg
here.
was funny. So, you know.
There we go.
But you can do a lot of things with that squiggle.
So obviously we dove into shapes and how we can try to subvert them, and then also trying to play along into the identity of said character. But again, that's just simple. That's just basically a design. Now, obviously, we can tell, based off your Oscar warrior over there, that he had his round edges and whatnot, and you can tell that it kind of subverted the concept of a circular character being friendly because
Mhm.
you see that he's a grouch. You saw the angry eyes. You're able to see him in a more, disheveled state or whatnot. I think another interesting aspect as well that comes down to character design is also like just like entrepreneurialism, set location, location, location. All right, it's all about location. So depending on where your character lives or what your character does, also dictates what they wear. So, for instance, obviously, if you're gonna have the best examples I have, this is not a spoiler, but Fantastic Four: First Steps. In the movie, it takes place in a retro futuristic, sci-fi New York, basically the 60s, the 70s made to life, right? And you're able to see what everyone is wearing in that movie. Very retro looking, very much 60s and 70s oriented, especially within New York. You get to see how they play along with that style and aesthetic. And not only that, it also dictated how the Fantastic Four wears their overall uniforms.
Mhm.
So again,
I really, really loved the vibe of it.
oh, I saw
Good
the
to
movie.
have you in, Janice. Glad you like it. Hope you stick around and enjoy it.
Hey, howdy,
We
hey,
try
how
and
we
be
all
as
doing today?
helpful as we can possibly be. I am one of those people that firmly believes in sharing all the information that was shared with me. I'm a rising tide raises all boats kind of guy up in here. So, and we're just talking about characters and shape language and whatnot today.
We love you, dude. Golf ball
Oh,
player 222. Huh,
look at
two two
that.
two.
I love you too, golf ball player. Nothing but love up in here.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see like how quickly these two characters read as different characters from each other. Like you're not going to confuse those guys as being the same guy, nor would you confuse this cat over here with being one of them.
Mm-hmm. This also plays into whether or not this plays into their. And now this also depends on what kind of story you want to tell as well.
Hmm.
Because for me, obviously, I'm making a superhero story, so a lot of my characters very much look. Come on, they all obviously look more human oriented. So trying to play with the shape of these characters, which again, one of my favorite characters I've designed thus far, and I feel like it's a collaborative effort between the both of us, is Rocket Fist. I love that
Hmm.
character because he has such a distinct silhouette, given the rocket powered boots, his gloves, and not only that, his hairstyle is what very much separates him from literally every other character that I've created thus far. And you're able to kind of see a lot of that shape from it. But automatically, look at this. You can tell that these are very, very unique characters. And I feel like this would be a very crucial part when designing a character that you want to start off with a silhouette that can actually just give you a good chunk of information from the get go. Like again, the first one looks like he's a perfectly, proportioned out, rebel looking kind of a hero. The other one's a skinny. You could probably say that he's intelligent, maybe the opposite. The third one being more rounded out, he could be the comedic character or the snarky one to some extent. And I mean, the top one, it looks like is a guy wearing a cape, so like a classic hero of some kind. So you're playing
And
into
like
the shape
where
from
you place that cape, how long it is, all this stuff can really change the silhouette. Like, what they did in the 80s with Batman's cape, where they took his ears like really long and his cape would become the whole outside of his silhouette. And he would just be this tall shape with this long cape spreading out on the ground or hanging down from the rooftops and stuff. They just took it to real extremes, which made this interesting new silhouette that we'd never really seen for Batman before. And it was iconic for years for Batman. And it just totally changed the shape of him by using it that way. It gave a whole different feeling to him.
exactly. Not only that, but since you mentioned Batman, this is actually a really interesting thought process as well. Depending on the character that you're writing, that also dictates not just their overall design, but also how other people perceive said character. And
Mhm.
Batman's one of the best examples by far, simply because people are scared of him, right? So this actually can dive into what do you want the character to emulate, right? Also, we're getting brutal in the comments here, guys. Cool it down. Cool it down. Let's not be so aggressive over here.
Yeah, let's be nice. Let's keep it friendly up in here.
Come on, we're just two uncles just trying to give good information out there in the world. We're trying to make a positive impact here now, people. All right. But anyways, back to what I was saying. The concept of some characters and their overall design, and Batman being one of the best examples. Batman, it turns out in the comics, he is supposed to be a representation of fear. He was scared of bats. He dresses up as one, so in that way he can scare criminals to not commit crimes. Smart decision there. But the one thing I always find a little hilarious is that there are some crooks and criminals that think Batman is like a myth or a
Mhm.
legend or something of that kind of caliber, which plays into the idea of him being just as scary. And not only that, here's a fun fact. There is a Batman Repo video game. If you know what Repo is, it's a video game where you play like these little robots and you're trying to take all these little things and trade it in for money. But in this case, it's like you're playing as a bunch of crooks trying to steal from like all these other, businesses or these buildings and whatnot. And in the process, Batman's trying to stop you. But what's scary about it is that Batman goes in brutal and it's like, what the heck just happened? Like, so seeing some of the gameplay footage that, from what people have shown on TikTok and whatnot, it really cemented the idea that Batman is supposed to be like, oh crap, people think he's a demon. And footage like that actually explains why. Again, that plays into
Mhm.
the idea that he's supposed to represent fear. Now, let's actually look at the opposite spectrum and let's look at Superman, right? And also, before we touch on Superman, I also like the idea that Batman's, being completely covered is like giving him more of an anonymity to him, showing
Mhm.
off that like you don't know what's underneath the cape. It could be like a void of some kind. People getting, whatever, and people
Shows
always,
it makes him look so much less like a guy when that cape got so long and so extended, and he just becomes this shadow, and it was really cool.
exactly. And then now going on the opposite end, which is kind of funny because Batman's supposed to represent being something scary, almost like a demon. But yet on the opposite spectrum, you have Superman who's trying his best to look like a brave, heroic man, though he's an alien. And you can kind of see throughout his costume that it was made by his mom. So you can kind of see like how his mother would potentially put his whole like family crest on his chest to make it look like a very, wholesome kind of person to show that he is super, that is his symbol that is to be displayed on his chest. The cape, red flowing, just like the American flag, if you will, to some extent. The underwear over his pants. Like it's to show that he's not scary. And I love what David Cornsweet said in interviews when it came down to designing the Superman costume for the new movie, was that he wanted him to feel friendly. He wanted the idea to keep it a little silly, just because it's like, look, I fly around in this city in my underwear. You're right. You don't have to take me too serious, but serious enough to where like I can fight a monster kind of a situation. But also look at the silhouette of Superman, very broad over here, very, whoa.
Yeah, you ain't the only one getting it, man. It's loud over here.
Oh my god, that's wow. Sorry,
And here you thought we lived so far apart.
East Coast baby. Whew, sorry, that got me. That was just out of nowhere. Okay, so okay, totally wasn't just scared of the overall lightning that just struck down. Well, anyways, very so again, kind of like playing up to those situations there. You can kind of see how each of those characters have some variation of shape being played with it. Obviously, with Batman, they try to keep it very anonymous, just because they want to give off the fear factor that he's someone that you should be scared of. While Superman, you see him like a broad-shouldered, heroic individual that shows off that he is strong but yet kind. He's strong enough to be gentle, which is a really interesting, thought process to kind of really, look at
Mhm.
from that kind of perspective. And again, I'm loving what I'm seeing over here with all these awesome silhouettes, and especially like the new second line. The first one, I love, like, how very curvy she is. Obviously, you can tell, like, based off of a first glance, it looks like she's like a spunky young black girl, just thinking that she's just like top tier. Love it. We're here for it. The second one, very, slender, slim, probably is cool and collected. Maybe not. Who knows? I also the robot silhouette automatically. I'm just thinking like a Cybertronian or something like that. Like
Mhm. Well, and it can be anything. Like, I mean, it can be a robot guy. You can use the squares and stuff and the triangles and the hard edges to use the same big shapes and still mimic the shapes you would put in, like, say, a muscle man or a He-Man or a barbarian or something.
Exactly.
And that makes Optimus Prime look so big and strong when he has that narrow waist and those great big wide shoulders and stuff. Like, that's what gives you that feeling on him. I mean, you could also be using rounded shapes and cylinders and all kinds of stuff to make what's her name, RC or whatever, look, skinnier and look like a female. And they're both robots, but you can use
You're playing into the different shape languages
yeah.
that actually like emit that kind of that overall aesthetic to said character. And also kind of diving back into some other topics. So for me, it was like location, location, location. That's the most important factor when deciding how to create or design your character. Again, I've talked about the Fantastic Four movie and how they were stuck in the retro futuristic style of the 1960s, which dictated how their costumes were made. It also dictates what kind of material was used for said outfits and how that was being implemented in their overall, designing phases. So same situation with Batman, like what era of Batman are you from? Like, is he the 80s, the 90s? Is he in the 40s where, he's wearing nothing but spandex and underwear? Or is he, freaking Robert Pattinson in an armored suit, being a detective? So those are some other factors that need to be taken in consideration. Now, another thing on top of, say, silhouettes, you also want to make sure that your design is simple enough. Now, let's be honest. Comic books are repetitive. Like you have to draw characters over and over and over and over
and
again.
over and over. I mean, it ain't animation, but you're gonna have to draw this character thousands of times before you get through a book. It's gonna be heavy. You're gonna have to go through it a whole bunch of times. So you need to, if you're doing a comic book character, you want to keep it something that is going to be easy to repeat over and over again, something that gives you all the information that you need to know what the character is, know what the suit is, all this stuff. But you don't want to draw every stitch on the belt and all the buckles and every little detail every single time, because then that's going to make this character take forever to draw. And
Exactly.
I know some guys that take like a year to get a book out because they're putting all this little stuff in, and nobody's really going to even read it. Nobody's even going to see all of that. They're going to see a whole bunch of stuff. Go, oh, that's cool, and move on. They're not going to count all the stitches that you put in, or the fact that you drew wound thread in those stitches. That's ridiculous. Don't
Exactly. You really want to like make sure you keep a lot of your designs simple. And if there's a way that you can like show off all of the what's it called? Like, for instance, a really good example is like Aquaman's scales, right? Or like Captain America's chainmail. If you can find a way to like show that off, but without having to draw in every little minute detail, obviously that'd be one way to go. That'd be very, very easy on your part. But yeah, so that's definitely one factor that comes into consideration, that you want to make sure that you're designing the character based off of the timing, the location, and then not only that, knowing what their suit is even made of. Because again, that does play a very important factor. And of course, you want to simplify. Simplifying a design makes your life easier, and it makes the life of, say, the reader just as easy, to help page along through the book, So that way, say, because again, I can only imagine how many times people have been drawing Superman or Batman over and over and over again. And imagine all the crazier, newer, like intricate suits, right? Like those are like way, way too intricate. Some suits are like, bro, I don't know how you have all that time to draw the character in that kind of way. But I do like another good character who's like a simple costume, but yet has way too much going on is the Spider-Man suit. Just the basic Spider-Man suit with all the webbings and whatnot. I could not.
Just the basic webbing is one thing, but once they did like the Tobey Maguire movie, and then people started trying to draw it with the raised webbing and stuff, and then it becomes a mech suit, and you have to throw all these little edges and stuff around the webbing, and it gets more and more complicated more and more times. Oh my goodness, I don't want to draw that. I don't want to draw Spider-Man and Marvel Comics and have to be expected to draw that thing over and over and over again. That's too much for me.
It is. And I mean, obviously there are times where the artists themselves, especially working on some books, they'll find a way to like make a cheat on like not having to put all those details in there, especially if you're seeing Spider-Man from a very, very far distance. So if you're seeing Spider-Man from a far distance, you don't really need to put all those webbing designs. But if you're, say, like getting like face close and whatnot, yeah, of course you're going to want to put in some detail in there to show that the costume is made of something. And now let's also talk about what kind of costumes can be made. So, like, for instance, we have, obviously, for typical superheroes, it's usually spandex or some variation of cloth-like material. So, that could be something really interesting to dive into, especially, when it comes down to designing a different type of hero. You have Iron Man who wears different kinds of armors, which could actually dictate and play out on different shapes and different sizes. That can play on different triangular shapes, rectangular shapes, circular shapes, and could emit a different emotion, however you want to design that said character, right? So, like, let's just take Mr. Fish. You have this first character design over here with the cape and whatnot. So, like, what would you go with when it comes down to, this overall design? Like, how would you execute putting in the details?
See, I like to think through with the character. Once I know, if I have a vibe of what the character is going to be ahead of time, and I know, like, I want a guy with fire powers, or I want a guy with gravity manipulation powers, or a cyborg, or something. I like to think through, like, what are their powers, what are their abilities, and how do we have to work around that? Like, if you shoot flaming pine cones out of your elbows, then you probably need, like, the elbows of your suit open so they can come out, or you're just
Mm,
going to end up setting your suit on fire. Do your clothes have to be fireproof? Do they need to be made out of tougher, thicker materials? What do you have access to as a character? Did you have to build this suit yourself? Did you have to save up money and pay somebody to do it? Are you a super scientist like Reed Richards that can make magic materials that look like you're just naked and you're not wearing anything at all and it's got all these colorful patterns on it? Like, these are the things I like to think through. And, like, if you need room to be able to flex your muscles, maybe you need, your arms exposed, things of that nature. So, like, I don't know what this guy's powers are.
You know what?
Um
And that's actually a really good thing to. I really wish I hope I was able to emulate that, because that's exactly one factor that I want to take into consideration, which is like how the costume is made. Again,
mhm,
kind of like how you're mentioning about Reed Richards being a super scientist. Like, let's think about Spider-Man. There have been multiple media where he has just made his own homemade costume with nothing more than a hoodie, some goggles, and some makeshift boots and gloves. You know, and then there's people like Batman who made his own intricate armored like suit, utilizing different gadgets and everything else in between. Even if it looks as simple as a man in tights wearing weird kitchen gloves.
mhm.
So those are some very unique concepts overall to really take into consideration, especially when it comes down to superpowers. That part I really didn't fully take into context there. That's on me. Like, when creating a character, especially one that has superpowers, you do need to take into consideration what those powers are and what goes into, like, okay, kind of like you were saying, like shooting flaming pine cones out of the elbows. How would that costume look? What would it look like? What's the function? Like,
Mhm.
in the case of creating superheroes, function and fashion have to kind of work as one. Because the function of the superpowers would then dictate the fashion of how the suit looks.
Yeah, and, like, if you're going for, if I already know that I want this character to have a particular vibe, or I want him to evoke something that already inspired me to this idea. Like, if I have a particular animal in mind or something that I want to incorporate into it, so that it plays off of my hero well, or whatever, then I'm going to think about that. Like, how much costuming does he want to put to this? How much is he willing to put up with? How much would work with their powers? And I think about things that most people don't really think about when they design costumes, like your field of vision, and, like, how hard is it going to be to move your head around in this thing and stuff like that. Because, like, I've built some costumes and stuff in the past, and nothing is worse than, like, getting your Spider-Man mask twisted and now you can kind of halfway see out of one eye hole or something. Like, that sucks, but that's be a really easy thing, and I don't know why more villains don't do that to the Flash or Spider-Man or something, and just yoink that mask over and just beat the crap out of them, because it doesn't take much to block your vision with something like that.
That is so
But
true. I also did some cosplay as well, and I actually made my own like little homemade Spider-Man outfit. Like, by homemade, I made it look like if it was his first suit. I had like this really oversized red jacket with like, some with like a white base on it, like red sleeves, red hood. I had this luchador mask that I got from Mexico or for something like that, and it had like the eye shape, the mouth being opened up. I wore my jeans, t-shirt, so, and I even took some like gloves from my gas station that was meant to like fix cars or whatever, and I made it fingerless. So I had like little fingerless gloves, made it look like a homemade Spider-Man outfit that would use his fingers and stuff like that. And you're not wrong, because costumes and stuff like that are like, especially with the ones that are skin tight and with the masks and whatnot, I can totally see that being like an annoying factor of like playing with the material, and it's just like a whole, it could, honestly, I'm surprised.
Oh yeah, roughhousing with one dude, and that mask got turned on me sideways, and then I got popped in the face when we were playing, and I couldn't see it coming. I couldn't see it coming to move out of the way because that mask got moved on me, and I have never freaking forgot that. I also like to think like, how do they get into this costume and stuff? How do they get out of it? Things like that help add to how I'm going to design it. Like, is this like the Batman armor or the Iron Man armor that takes a while to get you installed in, and then you go out and like, I am planning for my day. I'm going to spend 10 minutes getting into this outfit, and then I'm going to go fight crime for the rest of the day? Or is this, young Spidey, oh crap, everything's going down around me. Quick, let me find some place to rip my clothes off and get it on. Those kind of things apply to what the costume's going to be like. Is this person, does he have impenetrable skin so he doesn't have to have a thick armored outfit on to protect him? Or is this just a guy? Like, maybe he's really strong, but he's not bulletproof. So, he needs to be able to lift a car, but he also like needs protection on his chest. I'm going to pick that, which then means, I'm going to say he needs the flexibility in his arms and stuff to be able to use his muscles. So I'm going to give him like a shoulder pad kind of thing that would flap over his arms, but give him room of motion there. I'm going to give him a heavy chest plate to, help protect those vital organs. And then, to me, that says he's going to have straps and things holding this on and all of that. Maybe he's got a little bit of protection around his neck in case somebody comes, with a baseball bat or something from behind the head. And then he's going to have some more straps on here, and he's probably going to have some forearm protection for, when people come at him with swords and bats and crowbars.
Kind of a crazy weaponry and whatnot, Home Alone style.
Yeah.
Actually, another thing too, as well, is we're also just primarily talking superheroes. That's just because I personally am making my own superhero comic. Mr. Fish works on a vast variety of different ones as well that don't necessarily touch on superheroes. Like, you have Alice Lost in Wonderland, which is a strange like fantasy world in general, and you have Alice who wears like this very unique costume. Doesn't really look like a superhero thing. It's just she's like a bounty hunter and stuff like that. And then of course have the characters from the Green Zone, which are all basically cops or mutated people in cop attire or in policeman uniform attire. So for me, like in my comic book universe, I very much play into the Marvel and DC concepts and designing characters, because it's a very superhero centric world. It's filled to the eyes with men in tights who fight other men in tights, and somehow it's not a weird thing. So it's you know what I mean? So it's like,
I always laugh that's my job. When people ask me what I do for a living, I usually start out by saying I draw muscle men and they're beating each other up in their underwear. And then they look at me weird. I'm like, I draw comic books for a living. And they snicker and laugh and then start asking me a bunch of questions about, do I draw Spider-Man? And then I'm instantly like, no, I draw comic books nobody reads, because essentially most of us have a readership of like under 200 people. But, if it keeps the lights on, it keeps the lights on. So that's awesome.
That's true. Another thing too. So obviously, so there's plenty of other ideas too that also play into design as well. It's also, like I said, setting is one of the main inspirations. So we've been talking a lot with superheroes, and they always tend to be very city oriented. Now, it doesn't just mean that some of these superheroes can just have automatic suits of armor made of like high tech. Sometimes it could be magical armor, or maybe, they're wearing some kind of a robe or some kind of an attire based off of a different culture. So that's always something interesting, especially like in superhero worlds. But what if we left the realms of superheroes and say dove into fantasy? There's knights, there's wizards, there's monks, there's all of these other kind of crazy spellcasters and warriors of some kind that have a unique method of fighting. And
Mhm.
playing into the dynamic of their maneuverability. And also, again, this is also about the tone and the setting of the story as well, because again, we're talking about designing characters primarily, I'm assuming, for most people who are watching, for action oriented kind of stories. You're drawing people in power armor, magical suits, wielding big freaking buster swords, or Final Fantasy style and whatnot. So it's like that makes sense. But sometimes you probably have a character that might be completely and just totally boring. Like, for instance, not to say that Lois Lane is a boring designed character, but honestly, she's just a woman, right? She's just a woman who wears, a cardigan, some pants, maybe a skirt if she's feeling spicy that day, and there you go. But how can you make a design like Lois Lane feel very unique? What
Mhm.
makes her stand out in comparison to, say, the rest of the other women in the DC universe, or even to an average man in the DC universe, right? So, like with Lois Lane, there's like her main color is purple. Like James Gunn actually specifically did this, and he did this for the Scooby Doo movie that he made, as well, because James Gunn did everything. So he did the Scooby Doo Spooky Island movie, and then he also did obviously Superman. So the funny thing was that there was a specific magenta that was used for Daphne in the Scooby Doo movie, and the clothing was made with that specific magenta. And then same situation with Lois Lane because her main color is purple. So purple is Lois Lane's color. Now you can also, so knowing like, and again, coloring. So now that I kind of got myself talking about this, we can also talk about the coloring of a said character, which actually would dictate a couple of other factors as well. Batman being always dressed in dark grays and blacks, imitating the night, darkness itself. Superman dressing up in blue, red, and yellow, representing bright colors, again, the American way and whatnot. And Spider Man being in the red and blue again, but it's also kind of seen as something friendly, but yet equally as dangerous to an enemy. So color is also another major factor when designing a character too, if you're
Oh,
planning on coloring your comic.
and and like you were saying, there's so many cool things that can go into the character design when you're talking about like what era they're in. Like I think they did a really neat job incorporating that retro futuristic vibe from the 60s and stuff into Fantastic Four. If you're doing like a steampunk book, research Victorian outfits and stuff and see, you can find all kinds of neat things that you can apply or you can reuse in a different way. Like for instance, let me see. Uh, I think I have some assets here from the animation that I was working on. Let me see if I can find a good image of Alice
And
quickly.
I mean, speaking of like learning from errors, in a weird way, being a comic book artist means you got to be a bit of everything. You got to be a
Oh
bit of an
yeah.
architect. You got to be a fashion designer. You got to be a bit of a historian to learn how
Mhm.
buildings are made. Again, we've been always talking about buildings and preset, creating all these buildings and whatnot, and that creates a tone for said setting, or better yet, to more or less set the atmosphere in which your character is embarking on. And also, a setting can dictate what a character wears.
Oh yeah.
Whether if it's for a time frame or if it's city life or country life, or maybe somewhere in the middle where it's like the suburbs, and then of course dictating whether if it's in the past, if it's in the future. So those are some other factors that have to be taken into place. And also, a really good example, as you have right here, is Alice. You can tell she's
Mhm.
very much just wearing like some, it looks like hodgepodge put together kind of outfits or whatnot.
See, I want it to look like something that she would have been able to put together herself over time, something that she reasonably could have gotten. But also, I spent a lot of time looking at samurai outfits and like the layers of samurai dress and what they were wearing and the armor. And I spent a lot of time looking at like futuristic style high fashion because this wonderland that she's in is an interdimensional rift and there's all kinds of different dimensions and times crashing in together. I wanted her clothing to have a little bit of a futuristic vibe to it, but I also wanted to really kind of carry through a samurai kind of vibe, which is why she has the kind of skirt sash thing on that she does. Is, it's from one of the lower layers of the samurai outfit that they would
Mhm.
wear, but it also looks like a sexy high cut skirt on her, which is nice. And I put the belt around it to kind of give you that. a little bit of the young Alice vibe with the blue and the white and a bow, but also kind of tie back to like the kung fu gi kind of outfit, belt. The sleeves in her jacket, um, I specifically took that shape right there to
Hmm.
mimic the robes of a samurai as it like folds up around their arms and stuff. And then I just so happened to see a jacket in a retro futuristic fashion show, like an actual jacket somebody had made that was cut like right at the rib cage, cut really high, and then had big baggy sleeves, and it had a cuff sort of similar to this, a little bit lower down. So I
Hmm.
pushed that cuff up. I took bits from everything that I liked and put it together, and then I ended up with this outfit. Like the padding that she has over her shoulders, the only reason she has that is because Rabbit wears that. That's one part of Rabbit's outfit that has stayed the same almost since I first designed him 30 years ago.
Mm.
And and again, because Rabbit raised her, I wanted it to have that little bit of that tie back. So she's wearing the same type of shoulder padding that he would wear to protect that part of her body, and has, a hard outer shell on her upper shoulder and stuff, kind of reminiscent to the stuff that he tends to wear. She picked up stuff from him her entire life. She may hate Rabbit now and be wanting to kill him and hunting him down, but she picked up a lot from him. And so that carries through. Like the stockings, I like the stockings because I took them from Green Zone. The material is from the world of Green Zone, but it's interdimensional rift. Things can happen. And I liked the idea. There's a very specific reason, story wise, why she's dressed like this. And I can just tell you and the handful of people that are watching right now, it's because like one time Rabbit got caught with his pants down, relieving nature's call, and suddenly, a bounty hunter is on his trail, and he's got his pants around his ankles, and that's not a spot you want to be in that
Mm.
situation. So from that point in his life on, he tends to wear a loincloth and stuff, and like chaps, like something he can take care of business easily and then keep going and not have to put himself in a dangerous situation. Something that she learned from him later on, because she was with him older when this happens, and
Hmm.
she picked it up. So she wears this folded skirt thing so she can take care of business. But the stockings are actually uh they're flex steel. It's a material that I designed for Green Zone for like the superheroes, and
Mm.
it's like a thick neoprene type stuff that hardens like steel when it gets hit with kinetic impact.
Ah.
So it's flexible until, like, say, a bullet hits it, and then that section hardens like steel and takes most of the impact and doesn't let that bullet go through your body, or like a bulletproof vest can. you know It'll stop a bullet, but bulletproof vest might let that bullet go that far into your body
Ugh.
and then back out. So it still causes organ damage and stuff. It's not foolproof. And this makes it a big plate that hits your body. It might put a big giant bruise on you, but it's not going to let that bullet go
Right.
6 inches into your abdomen. And so she wears the leggings to protect her legs. And
Mm. And
but she
again,
also likes to use her sexiness because she knows people are stupid and they'll fall for that. So,
that is how it
why
be. And
not
plus,
take advantage?
and not only that, but just looking at her design, she's very simplistic. There's nothing
Mhm,
really complex about how you drew her, because you know how this character is going to look over and over and over again. Again, simplifying the design, and not only that, you even touched on function and the fashionable aspects of why she dresses the way that she does.
mhm.
Which is a really important factor. So,
Oh,
as
when I used to draw like cyborgs, it had so much stuff in it. You could tell where all these little pistons and rods were, and you could see all the little segments working inside the segmented muscles. And there were so many wires and so many joints and so many screws and bolts and fasteners. And that's how I used to design my cyborgs, because I only had to draw them maybe 10 times for fun in my sketchbook. Once I started having to draw characters over and over and over again, they started to become much more like the Transformers and have big sections, big boxy parts and big sections of nice, easy to draw Colossus, segmented muscles and things like that that are easy to draw quickly over and over and over again. Um,
Exactly.
Keeping it simple and repetition is the key. You can draw a really cool detailed image in your sketchbook or, for Instagram or TikTok that you only have to draw the one time. That's great. But if you're going to have to draw this character over and over and over and over and over, you need to look more at animation for inspiration. You don't have to go that simple. You can use varying line weights, you can use cool textured brushes and stuff, but you want to keep it as simple as possible because you are going to draw this 1,000 billion times over by the time you get to the end of your book if you're doing your job right.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
true. And I mean, not only that, but this also, I mean, you really got to have a special love for a character then if you're going to keep drawing them on a consistent basis as well. And I mean,
Mhm.
I'm loving this cybernetic guy right over here. And I can see how, like, there are some, like, for me, some of my characters aren't really hard they're not hard to draw by any metric. But I do know there are times where I'm just like, can the arm look like an arm, please? Or can we get the shoulder pad? Can we function today? Sometimes you're just going to have one of those rough art days, and it's going to be really like, it's going to get you sometimes. So that you got to be patient
and
with your.
that's where I fall back to this big marker, this fat marker technique again, over and
Yes.
over again. There will be times like in my brain, there's only really so many cool ways to draw Alice jumping out of a portal ripped in midair. And I don't want to draw the same one leg out, one leg bent, jumping position every time over and over again. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well just make one clip art image of her and just stamp that in every time and be this is her jumping out of a portal. That gets really boring really quick.
Very.
But eventually, like sometimes I have trouble with that particular image because I've done it so many times, it's hard to think of a new way to do it. So
Mhm.
scribbling with this big fat marker and then going back in with transparent ink and cutting parts away and moving things around and grabbing sections with the selection tool and moving it back and forth can really help me come up finally come up with something like, oh, wait a minute, that looks good. And usually, once I zoom in and I start doing the real drawing, I realize, oh, well, that went out too far and that was kind of out of proportion. And this needed to be a little bigger. And maybe his leg needs to move over a little bit. Maybe his knees need to be in a slightly different place. But it lets me rough it in quicker because usually when I start to draw, I start pretty well detailed and I'll do the head and I'll do the shoulders and I'll throw in, a little bit of the rib cage and where the hands are. And I tend to just stick with that and make that work. And I don't give it another pass. I don't see what else would look good. This in my brain gives me an easier way to just play around with rough shapes, see what looks good. It's easy to change. I don't feel bad about getting rid of this blob like I do if I drew half of a face on this already
Right. And,
and move
uh,
the rough shapes around first.
yes. And on that note, we also have a comment here by Mr. Nope. It's also an unfortunate truth that sometimes an extra detail is underappreciated or goes unnoticed because some people cruise through these stories. That is
Hmm.
true. Like the whole concept of, like the crazy part about comic books, and I always find this to be the most insane aspect because for me, I was such a perfectionist on like how I want my pages to look, especially my first book. Your first book is always going to be, the roughest one and whatnot. And the fact that, yeah, I feel like there are times where you're going to have to learn and accept that you can't make every panel, every character perfect. You're going to
Oh,
have
yeah.
to just get the point across and just understand that people are going to see this. Again, I'm surprised on how fast I can cruise through a comic book because I also want to appreciate the art, but sometimes I focus on the words too much, or sometimes it's the other way around. But it's like it's right. You're right. You do cruise through those. You cruise through the book so quickly that you kind of forget about those details.
Oh,
That's why
man.
sometimes I'd have to like read it twice, primarily so that one I can get the context, and then two I can enjoy the pretty art. You know.
Mhm. And I have to keep reminding myself because I got a really bad habit about getting lost in the details. And I there's a couple of things I do that seem like a waste of time sometimes, but they've always come in handy for me. And one of them is like I draw the whole background behind the figure because I never know when I'm going to need to use that background again. Like if I was drawing me on this podcast, the image of me is going to change a whole bunch. The image in the background isn't going to change because the camera doesn't change. So I would draw that background in good detail. And anytime this little window of me is showing up in a comic book with me on the podcast, I would be a new image, but that would basically be the same thing. Or if somebody was crawling around in the background, like that would change. But otherwise, that part doesn't change. I can't tell you how many times I've like drawn a bank, like the front of a bank, and that's come in really handy 3 books down the road as a reference shot, or an establishing shot again for, oh, we're back outside this same bank. I'll color it different. I'll put different people walking by in front of it, but I can reuse a lot of that stuff, and really save me time. Sometimes you can zoom in and crop it to one corner and then zoom in and crop to another corner and get a couple different angles out of the same image. Or if you can't use it exactly again, I've got a perfect reference image that shows me all the details back there that fish covered up. So I can draw it from another angle. If I need to draw me sitting at that table, I have a nice clean image of what that table looks like and what's on
Mm.
it behind me. Takes a little bit of extra time, but it has come in so handy so many times. And I draw in behind the word balloons and stuff, which some people would say is a waste of time because nobody's going to see it. But those panels without the word balloons often get turned into like motion comic images for the Kickstarter video or advertisements and posts and social media that they
Even
don't want
going
the
as far
word
as for like
balloon in.
scenic shots as well. Sometimes there's a moment where a character's just going to be quiet, and you just kind of
Hmm.
need to like let the character kind of set the emotion, depicting like let them like emote what they're saying without having to say it. You know what I mean? And sometimes you're not going to need words. You're also going to have to like show it through their face, or again showing it through their overall demeanor. And if it means that you know the crucible in the
Oh
background.
yeah, the crucible in the background of Caw was gorgeous. Yeah, I I worked really hard on that Caw stuff. I take a lot of pride in my work, and I'm only kind of going heavier handed as I go. Like Alice is getting more and more stuff thrown in the background, and uh, it helps flesh out the world to make it more interesting. Occasionally, I get lost in those details. I really like doing perspective shots because of the mathematical purity of it, like scratches a certain part of my analytical brain.
Mm,
And I like the fact that if I do it all right, all the lines line up and they all fit and work. And,
it
I
creates like such
know
a
how to do
gorgeous
it.
shot.
Yeah. But you can end up putting all this little tiny detail, especially digitally, in something that nobody's going to be able to see. Or occasionally, in that background shot, I spent a lot of time in a photo frame way back there in the background, making sure that mom and dad in that photo look like their features could have combined to make the daughter, only to realize it's too small for anybody to see, or worse yet, it's going to get covered by a word balloon and then nobody's going to see it. And I spent
Mm.
all this time putting all that effort into it. Sometimes that makes for good social media extra posts like, here's something nobody's going to see from the book. Here's this photo frame I spent way too long
Yeah.
working on. It's a mistake that I've made more than I'd like to admit, but
Oof.
it's easy to get lost in the details.
I mean, yeah, for sure. And obviously, that's the reason why as artists, we got to learn how to simplify. We love the details. We love getting very intricate. We want to know the functionality of a whole suit or a character design. But sometimes a guy just got to look good in tights,
Hmm.
and you got to call it a day. Sometimes you're drawing someone intricate as Thor, but sometimes you're going to need to draw Namor. You
Hmm.
know, so you either draw some guy in full plated armor, or you draw a dude in underwear, and you call it a day.
And see, and that's my thing. Even when it comes to spandex characters, uh, like I will tend to draw, like if I'm putting this dude in spandex here, make sure I got the pin on. I tend to put, a few little wrinkles in there. I'll have a seam around the shoulder and stuff so that it looks like real clothing, and there might be some bunched up wrinkles here and stuff. If he's just wearing, like regular spandex and maybe he's got, like a Spider-Man style glove, that comes up here. I'll put a little seam on it and a couple wrinkles around the wrist and make it look like he's actually like spandex really looks on people. You know,
Yeah.
it tends to have some little wrinkles and things. Not great big giant ones like denim, but it tends to have a little bit of shape to it. Um, there's a speedster, the Crimson Streak, in the Sentinels book that I do, which
Mm.
is like a classic throwback 80s style book. It's mostly public domain characters, but this is one of Roy's characters. And the Crimson Streak, Roy's a big like Star Trek enthusiast and stuff, and he really thought through the super speed, and he doesn't like the Speed Force, magic, which I kind of don't care for either. His take on it is that much like a warp field in Star Trek, the Crimson Streak is just stretching space, and he's shrinking the distance between 2 points in space. So when he walks across that shorter distance, to the rest of us, it looks like he across it. To him, he's really just like walking or jogging. He just shortened the distance between those 2 points.
Oh.
But so he's not killing himself running 100 miles. He's jogging 20 feet. But he just shortened the distance between here and 100 miles away. And because he doesn't need magical fabric that's fireproof and all this stuff, he's the only speedster I've ever gotten to draw where I get to put extra folds in his clothes and seams and things. And he's just wearing a spandex suit, and you can tell that because he doesn't have to have Barry's magical, fabric that's fireproof and
And
friction
fits in a
resistant.
ring.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't have to be able to do that. But if I do have to draw a character that has magic fabric that you can't tell from their body, then when I draw their body, next to the character in spandex, and all you see are their muscles and stuff, and that's the only thing you see, that stands out as different. That tells you that this is different. They're not wearing the same thing anymore. They're not both just wearing a skin tight costume. This person,
It's like wearing a
has
second
nothing
skin.
on or has a magical whatever. And, it really helps tell a difference with just those little bit of lines to tell the difference between this is fabric and this is something else, something fantastic that can do these magical things.
Mhm.
And I like that. If he was wearing something heavier, then these lines are going to start to get thicker, and these folds are going to get thicker and heavier, and there's going to be a lot more like XYZ shapes in the folds, and it's going to bunch up in the gloves, and
In a
his
weird way,
heavy leather gloves are going to stick out, and they're going to bend and fold, and they're going to have folds in the bends
the
of his
fingers.
fingers, and they're going to leave streaks across his hand where they fold weird, and all of that, and it's going to look like he's wearing heavier, real, thick fabric because he has to,
Mm.
because it's all lead lined to protect the radiation of his body getting out or whatever it is.
Or not only that, but that can also emulate like or hold on, sorry. The thing that kind of got me thinking about, since you mentioned the Flash and like speedsters and whatnot, it also reminded me of the CW Flash show, and
Hmm.
how like at first they made his suit very thick and very like very padded, and then eventually over time they tried their best to go to the comic accurate costume. But you saw how they went with the realistic look first, then they went straight to like, all right, let's see how we can try to manage our way to look more comic accurate.
And for the show, that shows that they're evolving in their skill. Like Cisco's getting better and better and better at making these things, and he's getting smarter, and his tech is getting better, and they're incorporating things they learned from other villains and stuff. That, oh, I didn't even think of doing that. Oh, okay, we could do this, and that kind of stuff makes it. I love seeing it grow like that. That's part of the reason that What's up, Adam? That's part of the reason that, like, through Alice in Wonderland, all the different times that we'll see Rabbit, his outfit will start to change because we're seeing him at different points in his life.
Mhm.
And at some points, he picks up bits of armor from here or there, or he picked up a bit of style from here to there, or he got a new piece of tech that he carries with him now, things like that. Or maybe he got injured and now there's scars, or had to have something replaced and repaired. And he changes as time goes on because he's lived a really long adventure, life. You can't get through that without coming out looking a lot different than you went in.
Yeah,
So,
that's definitely. And this actually reminds me of one of my favorite other artists. Don't get me wrong, Fish, you're my top number one favorite artist, but but
I
it
ain't
reminds
hung
me.
up about it.
Well, there's also this other artist, Ruben Perez. He goes by Ruben Draws 42. He has like a very angular style. I love his style, and he actually started doing like a bunch of like different renditions of like he'll take like classic characters like Superman, Batman, the
Hmm.
X-Men, and he basically did a whole redesign series. And I love the way how he interpreted the designs. And this could also lead into something else as well. When you're designing a character, make sure to also look for other forms of inspiration. Don't just try to look towards
Oh man.
that I think should be the number one thing that you should also learn as well. Like comic artists got to learn how to be architectures, fashion designers, historians, because you got to learn how these materials are made, why they were made, what function does the costume serve, and not only that, what time frame are their clothing based on? Why are they wearing some specific items and whatnot? And I mean, again, I feel like we only just like scratched like just nothing more than a small fraction, the surface of this.
Oh
But
man.
like with this artist, he actually takes like a few design concepts. Like when he created his own rendition of Superman, he did like some other fun concepts with it. Like he took Charlie Brown. Let me see if I can find it over here. We go. His inspirations was like Charlie Brown, Steven Universe, and like a few other Superman renditions. And he was able to kind of put it together. He created his own headcanon on how it would work. And that implements itself throughout the designing process. Also, look towards, not just like obviously look to different cultures because different cultures have different yielding styles. Those
Oh
styles can
yeah.
very much be implemented. I mean, again, you were just talking about how Alice was inspired by like Ronin and Asian based
Hmm.
warriors and whatnot. Like for
But
instance,
like redoing the Justice League, and what would they look like if they had grown up, like in an Aztec society or in, a Samoan society? Like what would those kind of design influences and history done to the characters? How would they look different? How would their costumes be different? How would it can come up with such cool stuff and be so inspiring. Or taking things from different cultures around the world and different ancient cultures and stuff that might have been
yes,
lost, and then applying that to say a sci-fi book. And how do these Aztec designs and styles and sensibilities that they used and stuff, how does that translate into this spaceship, let's say? And
exactly.
it can make stuff so interesting so quickly.
And not on top of cultures, also take a look at some other forms of entertainment that you're not really used to. Again,
Hmm.
like looking at maybe classic 80s cartoons or 90s commercials, or better yet, looking at what's it called, like animes and other TV shows, especially ones that are taking place in a really unique setting. If you were to dive into those kind of topics, it can help you, take inspiration. And again, another good source of it, video games. Video games are
Oh
another
man.
good source of inspiration, especially for some character designs depending like say if you want to design an intricate character say like from Destiny 2 or whatnot, or if you want to go as far as to designing a character in the Marvel Rivals style, they're
Mhm.
very highly intricate, but yet they take like the concept of a simple character and they probably go crazier with it, or they just dumb it down and make it more simple.
And you can study what they did and break down what they did and how they did it. Like, you don't have to copy the way, say, Wolverine looks in Marvel Rivals, but look at how they designed him. What did they do? What active choices did they make? What was different? What was a callback to the past? How could I use that kind of thing to influence this? Like, I've when you really break it down and look at a character from this game or that movie or this property or whatever, and see like, you know, they really used like the design of circuit boards and stuff to influence the designs of the patterns in their armor and their outfits and stuff. Like, I could use that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
and then figure out how you could apply some other cool texture that you dig that gives the vibe of what you're looking for in your story, and apply it in the same way they did on these things. That's break it down to the key points of what they really did and then apply that to what you're doing instead of like a direct lift one for one, like, oh, I use, Wolverine shoulders and put them over here. That's
It's
that's
like
easy.
it doesn't hurt to like take those kind of other forms of inspiration, but learning and like dissecting is like in a weird way. It's kind of like learning how to make a sandwich through looking at the ingredients of a sandwich. You realize that there's bread, and then the contents
Mhm.
inside, like what's in it: tomatoes, bacon, lettuce, and balsamic vinegar, mozzarella. Who knows? So it's like there's a lot of stuff within the confines of a sandwich. So you want to like
But
learn,
you
you want to
start looking at the
dissect it.
ham sandwich at its parts, and you think, a croissant is bread too. If I cut that croissant in half. Oh, wait a minute now. If I take aspects from a grilled cheese and I butter that and I grill that on the grill and then I put it all, oh, son, now we're talking a sandwich. You can take things from these different things and apply them together in new ways and come up
And
with
make
some really
something
good
new out of
stuff.
it. Take a ham sandwich and you might make a ham sandwich into something else entirely different. And that's the
Mhm,
point of character design. You want to make your own interpretation of a ham sandwich. You're not reinventing a wheel. You're just
mhm.
making it more different and more tailored to your car. Think of it that
Yeah.
way. We can use many different analogies that we're going to be going on and on and on about, but those are some very interesting factors, especially when it comes down to creating characters, learning the time zone in which the era in which the character takes place in, or better yet, what realistic factors do you want to put into it? What fantastical factors do you want to put into it?
Mhm.
Sci-fi, fantasy, a hybrid of both? Do you want to try to set this in where dragons exist? Do you want to try to set this in where, somehow slime monsters from planet Z somehow manifest in the form of your dreams? Like stuff like those really are very important to take into consideration when designing a character. Now, obviously, this is a lot of detail. Sometimes if you just want to draw a guy in tights, just draw a guy in tights. If you know how to draw armor, go ahead and do that. But all to say though, learn, study, widen your perspective on different things that you want to learn from. Like again, some of my characters are very much spandex wearing heroes. Like I have my character, the Emerald Turtle. He is a Power Ranger character. Wears a helmet, has a whole green suit, has a whole morphing sequence that has to have him within his suit and whatnot. Right? Has some whacked out weapons in the style of Tokusatsu. Totally took that inspiration by the way from Lucky 33 as well. Like when he had Niseko, I was like, I could do something with that. I could take this public
Mhm.
domain turtle character and make it something else entirely different.
Oh, it
And,
really inspired me too. It's had my head going ever since. I haven't been able to come up with something solid that I like as much as what he did with it.
and oh, what for the green turtle?
Oh no, for the character in what is it, the New Legionnaires, or you know what I'm talking about? Lucky 33's book, the with the
Yeah. Oh, the
superheroes.
luminaries.
Yeah, that's it. The new Illuminaries. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I actually
Uh,
remembered. I actually designed a few of his characters. He gave me all of his Hero Forge variants, and I took those and I tried designing them as realistically as I could. And it was from 1956 and whatnot.
oh,
It was
cool.
it was like the older generation. Even generational heroes can also be something interesting as well. Like it's taking again, honestly, that his drawing his characters was actually very interesting because you got to see like a whole slew of other characters, but then seeing how you can translate it to something else. Like if you're trying to create, like for instance, there are different Spider-Man variants, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
imagine, say Peter Parker Spider-Man ends up giving up his costume over to his daughter or whatnot. There have been comics where that's the case, but the suit is always looking different because again, they always want to try to put their own unique spin on that as well. Thank you, Canada. Thank you, Canada, for the fun, hope, awesome words. But other than that, this goes to show you that character designs are just very intricate. There is not really a correct way. There's not a right way. There's not a wrong way. There is a way, and that way is your way, depending on how you want to design the character. Also,
And
depending on the story that.
your vibe is going to have a big impact on it. Like what you
Yes,
like, what you dig, what really gets your fire going, gets your juices flowing. That's going to that's going to inspire the kind of things that you like to design, and you're going to have your whole own new original take on things. Like the key is to me is try and come at it from a whole new direction with a lot of things. Like a lot of people have done variations of Frankenstein, but they all rely so heavily on the movie, the original black and white movie Frankenstein, and that design was so very different than the book. Like they took their own weird take on it and made it look more like a zombie, made him look more dead. They made him big and tall to make him scary, and skinny to make him, look like he was kind of withered. He's got the big jaw to look strong. Like they use
So
lots of these things, the flat head, the bolts on the neck. But people have been playing with those same tropes forever to make it read as Frankenstein, but it's just that one guy's idea of Frankenstein. That's not what he was in the book. I mean, he was tall, but he was beautiful. He was creepily beautiful. And,
and not only that, but on the topic of Frankenstein too, there was that one movie. I haven't seen it personally. I think it was I, Frankenstein, where it was like
Mhm.
Frankenstein in the modern day. They didn't go with the idea of him being like a weird grotesque monster. But he was actually a fairly decent looking guy. He just had a bunch of scars where his sewn up parts were put together and whatnot. And it was, something interesting of that kind of caliber as well. And again, kind of like with the Frankenstein bit, don't just fall into that situation. Like maybe when you want to design a superhero, don't just design like a Superman clone where he's just wearing his underwear outside and boots. Maybe
Mhm.
diversify, give him a shorter cape, a longer cape, give him a cowl or some kind of a mask or something like that. What's the design of the mask? Is it based off of an animal? Would you want to go into that animal design, or do you want to go completely left field? Like, I find it hysterical, especially with like characters like Green Lantern or like Spider-Man, right? Green Lantern, Spider-Man. There's another character in DC where Robin, right? Green Lantern does not look like a lantern in
No.
any way, shape, or form, and his powers have nothing related to a lantern other than being a light. That is
Mhm.
it, right? Robin does not look like a bird. He doesn't.
No.
He's just some kid in weird spandex or a padded armor or whatnot, and a cape with a weird domino mask. That's all. Like you don't have to play into. And like for Spider-Man, Spider-Man doesn't look nothing like a spider. I
No.
mean, do we hate him for it? No. I mean, the costume's iconic,
Mhm.
but it's like
It is now, but it had nothing to do with the spider other than there's one on his chest and his back. But
and then the
like,
webbing design and the webbing pattern.
yeah, the webbing, but they could have gone way scarier with it. Like
Oh,
I certainly
exactly.
have when I've done designs of Spider-Man. Like he's been terrifying looking. I
Yeah,
think
and I
he's an
mean,
absolutely terrifying character. I think much like you were saying of Batman, like if you live in New York with rumors of this Spider-Man crawling around on the rooftops and grabbing people with webbing and stuff, he would be absolutely terrifying. And as quick as he swings around and comes out of the shadows and stuff, like playing the new PS game with him and everything, he's an absolutely terrifying character from the
oh
bad
yeah.
guy's point of view. And I think that would be a really neat story of like a character that just everybody is absolutely terrified of. And like maybe you're not a bad guy, maybe you are, maybe we don't know. What would the story of Lois Lane be like if her superhero was this scary spider thing that hides in the darkness and grabs bad guys with these webs and snags them up and ties them to the rafters and like that'd be absolutely terrifying. What if the stuff that J. Jonah Jameson is saying is true? What if he really is a monster that's eating people? How do I prove he's not? How you know oh, there's so much cool possibility in there if you take the idea and go a different way. If you just do, this is my wisecracking teenage superhero that's a super gymnast and shoots cables out of his wrist launchers and makes wisecracks and goes home to his elderly uncle and fights crime because his aunt died and told him that with great costume designing ability comes a great need to help your fellow man, then I'm bored. I don't want to freaking read that. But if you make it something new, cool, interesting, take a weird take on it, then you got my dollars. That's all I'm saying.
And the funny part is that I did an entire like on my other channel, I did an entire like redesign on creating a public domain Spider-Man using the Ben Cooper Halloween costume. Wear underwear on the outside normally. That's why none of my characters have it. Love that. But yeah, I kind of did my own take using the Ben Cooper Spider-Man Halloween costume because apparently that's in the public domain. I don't know. Do your homework on that. But I took elements from that costume and make it a little different. Like I put the spider logo on his chest and his face. I made it primarily yellow because that's what the costume is. And not only that, I didn't do like a typical little spider logo. I made it like a hexagon type shape. Learning to play with shapes and different logos actually does help out by a ton because that would help distinct your character in so many other ways. And not only that, I mean, learn their powers, learn their abilities, learn how that all functions. So there's just a lot that kind of goes on there. Like obviously I do a public domain series where I just take characters and basically make a Marvel or DC copy of it. Like my first video on my newer channel, I just made a knockoff Superman, and it's heavily reliant on the James Gunn's design. And I'm actually in the process of creating my very own Batman, which is based off of the owl themed public domain character. But the design looks
Which
vastly
there are
different.
plenty of.
Oh yeah, oh trust me, there's plenty. I realized that there was a lot of owl-based characters, a surprising amount of spider-based characters. I'm actually going to be hopping on those eventually at some point. But again, I want to say though, you can play with the designs and really just kind of make it vastly different. You can play into the fact that they're a mutant, and something that we even haven't touched on at all is like suits or costumes that are a living organism. Like imagine Venom, or Sandman. Like these are guys that are made up of a specific thing. One's made of a space goo, one's made of sand, and you can have one made of mud or water or whatever, and that could play so many different factors as to like how their costumes are basically designed and stuff.
Or the thing basically being made of rock.
Exactly.
Like I have a character that has gravity manipulation powers that can pull rocks up to himself and create this like giant form around himself, like a giant thing manipulating the rocks around him. And but because of like the way I've thought through the way his gravity manipulation powers and stuff work, he has to have his hands and feet free so he can like be touching the ground and stuff and have an impact on these things around him. So he has to run around barefoot because of that. That's what I enjoy doing with my characters, is really trying to think through how does this work and what would they need to be able to make it work.
Right. And I would also say it too, like another character that I realized that their powers are crazy, but their costume design is like something else, is Beast Boy from Teen Titans. He is a character who literally can turn into different animals, but his suit somehow
disappears
and
then comes back.
Exactly. Actually, in my second video that I made for my channel, I made a character that actually has power armor, and she can warp reality just a little bit, so that when she shapeshifts into other animals, that could actually like stay on her body. So then that way, when she turns into T-Rexes or bears or lions and whatnot, it allows her to still have the armor on, so she would look like this armored powered beast of some kind.
See, this leads me to one of my biggest issues in comic books, because I've always loved Plastic Man, and I was always willing to overlook the limitation of everything he turned into being red, black, yellow, white, and flesh colored. Like, okay, it's easy. That makes it easier for the kids to tell what he turned into. Okay, I could overlook that. I can suspend my disbelief long enough. But when they made it canon that he's not wearing a costume,
he's full blown just nuding it out,
that freaks me out.
Ugh.
What part of his body is that red? What part is that white? I don't want to know what part is that black or that yellow that he is stretching out across to make it look like this. I could only hope maybe he's got bright red nipples. I don't know. It freaks me out. It freaks me out, and I don't like it.
Or he could be, manipulating the blood flow to make it look like a red costume or some junk like that. That's nasty.
Yeah, that freaks me out. I don't like it. I know it makes more sense for him to be naked than to have some magical costume made. Who made it? Where did he get it from? It's a lot easier to just be able to say, okay, I get it. Clayface, I don't have a problem with that because he could turn himself into whatever. Sandman, I don't have a problem with the idea of him being able to change some of the sand particles to green to look like a green shirt. But when you're telling me this is a goopy ball of flesh that is turning, for some reason, that really bothers me.
No, I can see why. I mean, with Sandman, he's literally made of sand. And if he was just a dude in a t-shirt and jeans and he's just sand itself, that's like obviously a weird.
And if maybe the shirt and the jeans got turned into sand too, and they're still brown and green, and usually that just gets blended in with the rest of it when he stretches up big, and he puts that back on the outside when he forms back up. I can live with that.
And again, that's also another thing about comics. There is, unfortunately, kind of like how you're saying, you have to suspend your disbelief on some things because, again, comic book logic goes so far. I mean, we're reading stories about men in tights who fly, who are stronger than vehicles and nature itself.
Lots of things I'm willing to overlook and I'm willing to go along with. There's only occasionally that things really bug me that just don't make sense. Like when just anybody can like catch a 747 by the edge of the wing and, set it down and that plane doesn't fall apart because it's not designed to be carried by the end of the wing.
Exactly.
If you're gonna give Superman the fantasy power to be able to extend his super field over everything, okay, if you want to make that canon in the books, I will accept that he can do that. I don't, however, accept if Saw the Lightning Wielder does it and that wing doesn't pop off. I'm calling BS on Kyron Silver right there. Because
not Kyron. Come on, man.
I'll do it in a second. I'll call him out publicly.
I mean, you called him out as it is right now. But yeah, so I mean, that's just a lot with character. That's just character design. And I mean, we were just talking about the shape language and, just materials and what they're made of, or better yet, I mean, I don't know. There's tons of other things that we can really dive into. I mean,
I think there's a lot of potential for bringing a little more reality into comics at times. Like I really loved when they went a little bit more realistic design with like Captain America's costume in the first movie, and it looks like belts and buckles and straps put together to make this thing happen. I really dug that. I thought that was really cool.
That was actually that was another thing too that I found interesting because I wanted to kind of talk about that too. It was the MCUification on super suits, because obviously most of the super suits in the movies are inspired by the Ultimate line of comics.
Yeah,
in which a lot of those were based off a lot more sports material, military gear. So it felt like those costumes
more gritty, more realistic. Yeah.
Exactly, and supposedly it was set in the quote unquote the real world in 2003, I think, when those books were out. I don't fully quote me on that. I was 2, so, but again, it was trying to be a more realistic, situation there. So the costume designs were reflecting of okay, let's actually see what real material could be done here. Because again, the comic book superhero suits that we see in Marvel and DC Comics look very, very wacky. So again, we're trying to justify so many things, especially from those old Golden Age or Silver Age comics, where the costumes look really, really weird. Again, Captain America is a really good example of okay, that took the core elements of his suit design and you made it into something that feels realistic. It feels patriotic, but still feels like he's a soldier through and through.
Yeah, right? Feels like a soldier, not some weirdo in spandex. It makes sense. And frankly, they couldn't have done the scale mail that he wears in the comics. That would have been really hard to do and make it look right and not be noisy or too. It's hard to pull off. It's hard to pull off in reality.
And not only that, I think even the X-Men in the movies, the what's it called, From First Class to the Phoenix Force, because those took place in the 1980s, if I'm incorrect.
Oh, I like those suits a lot better.
Oh, with 100%.
Kevlar and the straps and stuff, and it starts to look more like a super suit, but I could see how you would get from real clothing to super suit that way. That made sense.
Not leather.
Skin tight black leather suits don't really make a lot of sense, but when the Matrix just hit billions of dollars, then we all do black leather because that's what's hitting right now.
And it was the early 2000s and 90s. Leather was leather. People were wearing it. It was the style. It was the fashion. 90s and 2000s were weird, man. I was raised in the 2010s, but I was from 1 till 10, I was in the 2010s, and that was the strangest decade because that was the 90s still trying to live, and it was living in a really weird way. But again, also just learning the realistic nature of some design elements, and I'm also agreeing with you on that because I do believe some costumes definitely should have an element of realism to it, but
and
just
the fantasy's fine too. It's fine.
Yeah, fantasies, yeah. But and also this ties into stylization as well. I mean, we're talking about simply designing from by every other metric, but obviously this caters to styles that are for more realistic or more or less you can tell that it's I guess I guess
If
you could
you're
say like,
doing a more realistic, gritty, like The Boys type story,
yes,
then you want to make it look like that. If you're doing a more like the Sentinels that I do is supposed to look like it is a book you picked up in the 80s. It's supposed to look like a book out of the back issue bin of some comic book store from a comic book company that got forgotten. Like that's what we're going for. So
right.
the costumes and everything, the colors are brighter, the colors are simpler, and and the costumes and stuff look like superhero costumes, and
Or
that's
it could even
fun. That's what we're going for.
or it could also play into an anime or a heavily cartoon style. Just like
Hmm.
in the Teen Titans that I grew up with, at least, it was took many anime inspirations.
Oh yeah, so much.
So the designs were very much catered towards an anime, aesthetic to some extent. But then there are other times. There was this one cartoon that Disney has called Atomic Puppet. It is the most wackiest looking cartoon ever. And it's a kid who gets his powers from a talking puppet. And it's like he's the superhero, but then the puppet is also a superhero, but he turned into a puppet. It's a weird thing. I only saw like 1 or 2 episodes of it. It's a more modern cartoon. But like again, the style for it is very, very cartoony, very like comic strip, not even comic book like. It's
Hmm.
more like something catered to a comic strip. Oh, and speaking of different styles, I think there was a Kid Cosmic. It's a Netflix series. It's 100% animated, but it feels and resembles like it is something from the 70s in a way, or like the style of comics is very sci-fi oriented, but has a very, very unique like cartoon style catered to it. Again, it's very much, and again, that has to play into effect as well. Your style is only, or like the design of a character is only as good, highly dependent on the style in which you're drawing it in. If you're
Hmm.
drawing a super cartoony book, there can be so much room for accepting all the weird, the wacky, and the zany ideas and whatnot. But if you're going for a more realistic style, it doesn't hurt to cater to the realism of said costumes. I mean, heck, Alex Ross is one of the best artists who've taken tons of these public domain superhero characters and made them look as realistic as possible, trying to justify the wackiest costume designs ever. It takes a ton of time trying to get someone to wear like like Samson and David. Literally, there's a hero called Samson and David, public domain characters based off biblical characters, and the
Hmm.
man like Samson is just a dude in a loincloth. Same thing with David. It's like you can see how whacked out and weird those costume design are, and you can only take that realism so far to where it's like, okay, you can play into the zaniness of it, or you can try to play into something else. Pick the lane that you want to go into. Like I said, there is no correct way, there is no wrong way. There is a way, but that way is yours, and how you take it is on you and or the artist you're hiring. So that's a very important factor to take into consideration.
Yeah. And there's lots of other things that go into that too. Like, I mean, and we're going to talk on this more again later. We're going to hit character design again next week and go into more aspects of it and what makes a good turnaround for a character and what doesn't, things like that.
I mean,
Things that I love getting in a turnaround on a character
yeah,
when a
learning how to
client
create
gives it
a
to me, and so I have all the information I need to make this character look right. So we're going to talk about lots of that stuff when we come back next week and get into more details. If you have questions, get them ready and join in next week. We're going to be launching again Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, or I don't know what it is on Little County Silver's time out there on the other side of the country, but you have to do the math on that. Uh, anyway, where can they find you at, Uncle
You
E?
guys can find me over at Weird Uncle E here on YouTube. It is actually my most fairly newest YouTube channel, just due to some other stuff. You can also follow Esteban Carrero, Estebanca, 2 R's, ERO. That is my first channel. That's where I have a lot more content. You can kind of see where I come from when it comes to public domain stuff. I'm trying to create some fun and engaging content, but Weird Uncle E is my primary account that I'm starting. So there's only like a few videos as of right now. And can't wait to see some of y'all on
There's gonna
Friday
be
to
more.
where we do our public domain redesign on a Batman character. So yes, you can find me there. And I honestly, I'm just going to primarily stick with YouTube. I barely interact with my Instagram as it is or other socials, just because YouTube is my most interacted here. So here on YouTube is my most interactive region by far. I'll see if I can start reaching out to other platforms or at least getting more consistent posting there. So you can find me on
Mhm.
YouTube at Weird Uncle Lee or at Esteban Guerrero.
And I am Mr. Fish Comics on all social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere. And Go Mr. Fish will always take you to my most recent campaign, which right now is the pre-launch page for Alice Lost in Wonderland 1 through 3. We've still got a few days. It launches on August 4th, which is Monday, which is scary. It launches Monday, and we still have time to beat the pre-launch goal. If we can get over 50 people, everybody on the first day is going to get a free 3-inch sticker. So go sign up for the follow page, gomrfish.com. It costs nothing to click the button, and everybody gets a free sticker because you helped out. So go do that. And with that, I do believe we are going to say goodbye, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Stay awesome, stay weird, and keep life to the easiest. But never forget, everybody, to stay ultra.